WHO Talk Show. Delighted to have this young lady with us. I think, first time meeting us, first time having her on air, but,
newbie.
But hopefully we don't offend her, and hopefully the listeners will like it, and she'll want to come back and talk to us again, right?
That's never a good introduction. Hopefully we don't offend you, but thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here, Ruby. And Ruby, your microphone is muted, by the way. All right, cool.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. There we go. We got you. Good stuff. Yeah. And so Ruby is part of Legal Aid Justice Center.
Mm-hmm.
And as we said, there's a lot going on right now, a lot of still uncertainties and questions in the community. People just want to make sure they have all the perspectives when it comes to folks' experiences, the law, the rationale behind things such as the flock cameras, as well as the jail improvement / expansion. And Ruby, you notice how I preface that, right? Because you got folks on both sides of that coin, right? Some folks are saying it's not an expansion. Y'all stop saying that. They saying it's jail improvements for Charlottesville Albemarle Regional Jail because the structure is so old, what have you. But as we know, in general, if you're making improvements to things, you're kind of making it better, and in some cases more spacious. A synonym for spacious is what, Max? Expanded.
Right. Yeah.
In any other context, if we added 17,000 square feet to something, we'd call it an expansion. But that's just me.
Yeah. But Ruby, but first things first, where are my manners? Good afternoon to you, and I want you to formally introduce yourself so folks know, exactly what roles you played, not only at Legal Aid Justice, but just sort of professionally in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again so much for having me on. My name is Ruby Cherian. I am an attorney with the Legal Aid Justice Center, and I work specifically in our civil rights and racial justice program. And you may see me around Charlottesville. I work quite a bit with our senior organizer, Harold Bully, in the community, with People's Coalition as well. So you may have seen me at a city council meeting or two at some meetings in Charlottesville.
Awesome, cool. Now, are you familiar to the area? Are you local to the area, or did you come here for this line of work?
Predominantly in our Richmond office, but I do. I'm pretty much in Charlottesville at least once a week working with Harold, like I said, and I went to school in Charlottesville as well.
Gotcha. Okay, good stuff. So I would love, before the conversation is done, to kind of just go over with you, things that the community should know about that you're working on, in addition to the cameras and in the jails as well. But let's start there, Max. And if you don't know, Ruby, Max and I have already talked to a lot of different folks, right? In regards to flock cameras and the jail expansion. We've talked to some activists. We've talked to formal council folk. We've talked to current council folk. We've talked to different elected officials, including the police department, right? And needless to say, you get different perspectives. So we're glad to have you, right, to give the raw legal, perspective, sort of, somebody that doesn't necessarily have, skin in the game either way, to kind of tell us about what has been experienced, right? Like what is sort of the legal ramifications, and then any public perceptions that you all have also ran into as well, by maybe some civilians that have talked to you about it. So how about we start with the flock cameras? How's that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Sounds great. Okay. All right. So what can you tell us about, I guess, one, the legal validity of it, right? And then the success rate, versus the profiling complaints, right? So let's start there with the cameras.
Yeah, that sounds good. Stop me at any time if you want to. I'm happy to talk a little bit about what ALPRs are, the flock cameras, if anyone is not familiar with them. Talk a little bit about the legal landscape here in Virginia, what you can and can't do with them, and talk about some of the litigation that is still up in the air about it, and some of the misuse and errors we've seen with this technology that causes us to have some concerns about protecting folks' privacy and making sure we're not having civil rights violations. But if you're not familiar with what an automatic license plate reader is, or an ALPR, it takes highly detailed photos of your license plate number when you drive by them. They're typically on street lights. They also track your make, model, and unique features of your vehicle. So what's a unique feature? So that includes things like any decals or bumper stickers you may have, roof racks, if you have a sticker in the window, aftermarket wheels, if you have a toolbox, if you have any exterior damage to the car, that includes something like rust. And what it does is it catalogs all of those details that makes your car unique. This is called vehicle fingerprinting through Flock. And it converts that into text that's then searchable by law enforcement. So they could search, Honda with rust, right? And search without even knowing the license plate number. So, ALPR is actually a little bit of a misnomer, I would say. And we have some colleagues who work in the policing project who argue that this is really more of a vehicle surveillance system. We're talking about much more than a license plate.
So it does sound like it's snapping a 360 picture of your car, which I'm curious as to how it's able to do that without taking a picture of the driver as well, or occupants.
Yeah, that is a concern that we have as well. Or if you're just happen to stand, by the street light, the company maintains Flock as the security company. If anyone's we keep calling it Flock. Flock is a security company providing this technology. They are maintaining that, the people are not searchable, but that is a concern that we share absolutely. And if you think about things like a bumper sticker, right? They share things like political affiliation, right? Any organizations they may be a part of. So all these unique details about your car are being cataloged into text that is searchable that we have some concerns about. But they also, in addition to reading your license plate, also Flock has some software and AI powered tools that it uses as well. So one is convoy analysis. So they can use license plate information to see what cars often travel together. They also have a program called anomaly detection. And so if a car has outlier behavior, right? So it's doing something that's not normal for that car or doing something out of habit, it kind of flags that car as a possible threat or emergency situation, right? So this is not just what you can observe on a license plate. It's using data and algorithms and combining them with AI to do, go beyond and aggregate this data and way to find patterns. And of course, if you're getting a picture of every car license plate, that's the back of every car that's driving by, that's a lot of data to filter through. So Flock also has what's called this NOVA system, which gathers all this data from multiple platforms and allows it to be more easily searched. So you don't have to search through different platforms, again, because they're just receiving so much data that it's hard to filter through. So that's a little bit about the technology itself.
So if I could ask, can you tell us, or do you know what components, I guess, of that program that specifically the Charlottesville Police Department have or are operating?
Yeah, so that, I don't know that I could say the exact specifics. There is what's called a transparency portal online that you can Google. And so that sort of information is not available on there, but I think we can say pretty probably confidently that convoy analysis and anomaly detection are just part of the software. I think the question would be if they have NOVA as well. But Flock is a company that really prides itself on layering these technologies. That's how they talk about it, to gather the most amount of data possible. So I'm sure, it's not just the license plate reader we're talking about, it's the software as well. And that's really what you're paying for as well.
Yeah. And we had that conversation before too about Flock. So thank you for that clarification again, because Flock is like Kleenex, right? People call tissue Kleenex, but it's just the name brand, right? So thank you for that clarification again.
No worries.
Yeah.
They're the largest one currently in the nation, and particularly in Virginia, operating this tech, right? So they have a large centralized database. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about what ALPR law looks like in Virginia, if that's of interest.
Yeah. Well, so but before we get to that though, I'm curious about, and you may touch on this in your next comments, but I'm curious about like the efficacy thus far, right? Like versus the complaints, right? Like versus the profiling and things of that sort. Like has one way outweighed the other? Has it been justified based on efficacy?
I think it's hard to tell because so far the efficacy has been reported by the local law enforcement jurisdictions themselves and not, for instance, like a third party who's really doing the research on that. But of course, we have heard about misuse and errors that has come out in a lot of news reporting. So for instance, it has been being used by federal agencies have been using ALPR data for immigration enforcement, even though that's technically against Flock's policy and against the policy of many police jurisdictions. But they are still using that data for law enforcement. States where abortion is restricted have also used ALPR data to try to prosecute accessing abortion in states where it's legal. So, for instance, in Texas, they did a nationwide search of more than 83,000 license plate readers while looking for a woman who had a self-administered abortion. And they accessed cameras in states like Washington and Illinois where abortion is legal. And we also have, of course, more instances of misuse and law enforcement officers not confirming the plate reads, right? Technology is not perfect. And so there are instances, for instance, in Aurora, Colorado, a Black mother and her 4 girls were held at gunpoint and forced to lie face down on the pavement with their hands behind their backs. And of course, as you can imagine, this is a really traumatic event. And it turns out her plate had triggered a hot list of stolen cars, but she was driving a blue SUV and the stolen plate was for a motorcycle, and they didn't even confirm that it was the correct vehicle. So just needlessly causing folks to have traumatic interactions with law enforcement. Similar situation. This is not, isolated. There are situations like this in Ohio as well, where a canine was released on Brandon Upchurch after a Flock ALPR misread his plate as stolen. In New Mexico, 2 sisters, 21 and 12, were held at gunpoint and handcuffed by law enforcement after a Flock ALPR misread a 2 as a 7. And there's also been law enforcement officers who have been found using license plate readers to stalk former partners. This happened in Pittsburgh, where he used an ALPR to track his ex-partner's movements. And he had over 100 pages of entries as far as her location, times, and not just of hers, but of her family members as well. And there was also an officer in Connecticut who used license plate technology to search whether he was being considered as a suspect for burglary. So we can see that there is this lack of oversight causing a lot of misuse and errors. And again, just, what's at stake here is a really traumatic interaction with law enforcement as well, even with these misreads, as you can tell, to be pulled over at gunpoint because a 2 was read as a 7 is really traumatic.
Right. I'm going to drill down a little bit and ask you whether or not you've received or heard of any reports of misuse locally here in Charlottesville. And then what's the likelihood of any legal ramifications if an officer does misuse the software? For the individuals who are profiled or subject to their misuse, do they have any legal ramifications as a result?
Yeah, so I will say with regards to Charlottesville, it's hard to know, right? There is no audit. So I can't say definitively yes, there has been, or definitively no, there hasn't been. Again, right, there are so many hits, there's so much data that it's really hard to audit this. And without any oversight, we wouldn't even know if it is being used improperly. And so really, we need a warrant for this. And then the other thing I will say in terms of...
So the Legal Aid Justice Center has not received any reports, though?
No, we have not.
Okay.
And I'm just going to introduce my colleague here. This is Maisie Osteen. She's a senior supervising attorney here at the Legal Aid Justice Center as well.
Maisie, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. It's really nice to be here. Thanks for having us. And sorry for my delay.
Oh, no, you're good. So, I guess this would be a good spot to just kind of, drop you in the conversation as well. So of course, Ruby has given us a great intro and a great sort of, synopsis of how, the LPR cameras are, I'm trying to stop saying Flock, how the LPR cameras are being utilized and some of the stats around that and whatnot. So if there's anything that you want to add to that, but I'm also curious as well, and this may be something that you can tackle, Macy, is it mostly about oversight, right? Like, to get down to the nitty gritty, is the camera itself can be used for good or it can be used for bad, right? So I'm curious about, as Max asked about, like the legal ramifications, right? Like, doesn't it more so fall on, and I'm asking the legal and professional question, like, doesn't it fall more so on the police department, or are there any infractions on privacy just by utilizing the cameras itself?
Yeah, and thank you so much again for having us. And to go back a little bit to the last question, I think that one of the things that was asked was what are the legal ramifications if it has been used inappropriately? And number one, you have to know that it's been used inappropriately, right? And so that oversight is really tricky, as Ruby was indicating with Charlottesville. But there have been settlements across the country where there have been improper hits. I know that you all were talking about some of the misuse. Those have resulted in settlements. So there are legal claims when these law enforcement offices are using or doing things that are against their policy, and then that's resulting in harm to the community. We have not been a part of those personally, but they are out there, and there are examples. And to your second question, yeah, absolutely. The license plate readers and the use of surveillance technology can be a use for good. There are definitely instances where missing people are found, or there's instances where people have positive interactions with this technology. The problem is that it's this unfettered, completely Big Brother-esque technology that's kind of everywhere. And without the oversight, there's little ways to kind of rein it in. And one of the big things that we talk about is hoping to see a warrant requirement, just a small, really a fairly, innocuous part of the legal process is for officers to be able to ask a court and say, I need this technology or I need this information for a purpose. And you have supposedly a third party that is unattached and can say whether that use is appropriate. And so just asking the court, hey, court, I think that this information would be helpful for us to be able to use in an investigation. It's pretty low. We all know that warrants get issued all the time. And so I think it would be a huge help in making sure that this wasn't applied and used inappropriately.
Great point.
And so how effective, though, would it be then if it's, it's a random instance and pretty much instantaneous? There's no, planned need for it until there is one. You know what I'm saying? Like how does requesting a warrant, how would that work if the need to activate Flock could be so instantaneous and spur of the moment?
And if a police department is sort of impeding that, like that ability to have oversight, then to me, that's a red flag itself, right? Like, why would you not want oversight to make sure it's being used properly? But yeah.
Absolutely. So to talk about the instantaneous, and Ruby, please jump in. But I think so that data right now is held in certain jurisdictions. It can be held more than 30 days. Now in Virginia, it's held for 21 days. So a lot of the data is not being used necessarily instantaneously already, right? People are putting in information and then looking back to track what somebody's movements were. So in those cases where investigation purposes are being used, it would be very routine for an officer to use a warrant to access that kind of similar information. In instances where there is an instantaneous need, there's an exception to the warrant requirement already that says they have an immediate need for that warrant. And so there's an exception that's kind of built into our due process system for those situations. We don't have at least I don't think, maybe Ruby, I don't think we have the exact data of when they're used immediately as opposed to when somebody's looking at retroactive information. But it seems in a lot of these instances that are coming up, somebody's putting in an officer or a law enforcement agency is putting in a license plate that they either want to track, as in a stolen car. So they're putting in a number, and then there's these hits, these hot list hits. And so that would kind of fall under that exigent circumstance, probably exception. Whereas those investigations where somebody says, okay, we want to know where Ruby drove her car through the city. Those things obviously would be easy to trigger a warrant and would be part of a normal investigation in most instances.
So we have thank you for that. We have a question from a listener viewer as well. What certifications does an officer have to be able to access this kind of information? And I guess
unfortunately, not much, right?
Okay. So can anybody on the police department access it, or is it just the chief? Or?
You have to have training. It's not just the chief, and also it's also not just law enforcement officers, but folks who work there as well. For instance, like analysts. You have what's in our understanding is about a 1-day training, and then you're able to access it on your phone, on the computer, and use Flock that way. It's not anything you have to be certified for. It's a low bar to entry.
So. I'll ask you, I don't know what both of your opinions are, like civilian-led police oversight boards. We happen to have one here in Charlottesville. And would a third party such as that be sufficient oversight for the use of this type of program, in your opinion?
In my humble opinion, maybe not. I obviously, I think that the civilian oversight boards were making great strides, and I think the idea is really a good idea at its root. Handing back the power of authoritarian checks to the people. Like, I think that that's a great idea. But as we know, and as we've seen in Charlottesville, there's a lot of struggles along with that process. And so I don't think that right now is the solution, although it could be in the future. The new law that went into effect in July requires an audit trail. And so I could see that, like, those audit trails maybe being released to civilian oversights. Right now in the new law, it doesn't allow those to be accessed through FOIA, which is generally how the Federal Information Act, that's how we usually would access it as just regular citizens. And so that will be cut off. And it's hard to see how that audit will really be tested. And I could see a civilian oversight board being very important in that piece. But the front end harm of the surveillance wouldn't be actually touched by that oversight, right? Like, that's once the harm's happened, we could talk about it as a community, but not so helpful on the front end.
You know, I did not know that. So that information, the information that Flock, or the other acronym that you mentioned, gathers, is exempt from the Freedom of Information Act.
And that's the audit trail, and that's new with the new law. And I think that the intention behind that was they didn't want everyday citizens, like each other, to be able to watch our neighbors. And so I think at the heart of that is actually a good concept, but it's also really troubling when we now can't kind of test the accuracy of the information, accuracy of when the justifications or reasons are legitimate. Like, we as people don't have that access right now.
Let me ask you a question. You guys can tell me whether or not there's any validity to this. I read that random citizens can purchase home cameras that can then be tapped into through the Flock system.
So first of all, there are actually Flock cameras, like ALPRs, that homeowners associations can get, businesses can get. So this is not something limited to law enforcement. And then they can opt to share that information with law enforcement, right, to create a centralized database. So even cameras that aren't, owned by the city or the law enforcement agency, they can still have access to private cameras.
Now, it's not so much the other way. Only law enforcement can access that network, or we don't know how wide the law enforcement definition is, but only law enforcement can tap in, whereas any citizen that has a camera associated with the network can share information. And a lot of the times that's how a lot of the information at the beginning was getting shared, because particularly Flock's, I think a lot of their initial cameras were in homeowners associations and private property.
Got you. Now we do have, to that, in that vein, we do have another comment or question. If it's okay to track with somebody is going through the Flock program, then is it okay to walk up and put a tracking device on somebody's car if you want to know where they want to go? And I think that kind of alludes to what Max was saying as well. But I mean, on somebody's actual property, wouldn't that require a warrant, or like, what's your response to that question, comment?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question, and actually something that the courts are dealing with right now. There's, been lots of challenges to Flock in Virginia, and maybe I shouldn't say lots. Right now, there's a handful. I think we will continue to see more as the technology develops. And I think the courts right now for the most part, have suggested it is okay. But I'm not sure the courts have the full understanding of the power of this technology and how quickly it's advancing, and that whole idea of the true, what is being said, the whole idea of that true surveillance, following people everywhere, understanding where they're going in their communities, is very different than just a number being entered into a database and having a single hit bing that says, okay, this license plate was here. That's not what we're seeing anymore. I know Ruby talked about this is so much information, and now when you integrate all of these hits, you're really being able to follow people. And I think that the comment talking about the beeper, there have been cases that have said that is okay, but there's some nuance to that case that says law enforcement could track somebody with a beeper, but part of that was that there was already an investigation going on, and that they put it on a piece of property that then the car owner put in their car. So there's already some distinctions that we can make. And the fight's happening right now in the courts to say whether that's okay and will it remain okay.
Yeah.
On that note, before if I can interject really quickly, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there. But on that note as well, we're seeing this case, the civil rights case being filed in Norfolk with the Institute for Justice, and we are excited. We're looking to see what happens with that case there. We should see further movement in that case soon. So the decision, there's still the exact question of that is still up in the air to be decided as well, and also just. Speaking, I've lost my thought. It will come back to me. I'm sure. I thought of it with the beeper, but it will come back to me at some point. I'm sure.
You keep thinking, because I wanted to add about the case that you shared. So keep thinking about that case, that Norfolk case. We should all be really interested in. It's really cool because it is a prospective. It is nobody's been. A lot of the challenges that we've seen have been where there have been criminal charges brought, and that the defendant brings a motion to suppress on the idea that evidence was captured wrongly. But this Norfolk case is interesting. A lot of these cases are out of Norfolk because they have 172 cameras. So a lot, they are under surveillance.
To that point, is it in areas with a higher demographic of people of color? Is that one? Are you noticing that since you mentioned Norfolk?
That is a great question. And I think there is a lot of connection there. And I think that a lot of, they often say high crime neighborhoods, which is oftentimes in their language synonymous with low income housing and supportive housing, which is a horrible connection. And that the Norfolk case is really interesting. This civil case is really interesting because both of these people are just regular Norfolk citizens who've not had an run-in with law enforcement. And so they're asserting their right, saying, I don't want to be watched. So it'll be cool for all of us to see how that case comes out and how the courts handle that.
Yeah, I've also been curious real quick about like GPS technology. Like most cars, more recent cars have some sort of GPS technology. Are law officers able to use that in a similar fashion? Like, can they like tap into that or request that information from the automobile manufacturer?
They definitely use it in civil
legally
cases.
Is the question.
Often. And they often use it in civil cases. I was a public defender in South Carolina, so a different system, but I did not often see that coming up. But I don't know if now we're in a new territory. In civil cases, I know it comes up often. We see the tracks of like what somebody was listening to. If we can see their speed changes. You can see all of that from those systems. And actually something that I just, in casual communication, like I personally was shocked by, is when you purchase a car with those really advanced computer systems, you actually sign an agreement that agrees to all the sharing, which
interesting.
I'm like really thankful for my 2013, like not so smart car right now.
There's no such thing as privacy anymore. People may as well forget that. There's no privacy.
Oh, well, it's like we have to grip on to holding on to it, right? Like where we can, we really have to assert our privacy when we can.
Yeah. I do think that's one of the arguments being made locally is that this is not a mass surveillance type of software. At least that's not the way it's being operated here, because it's taking pictures versus just constantly recording. But as you mentioned earlier, if you get enough hits, then effectively you are it is mass surveillance because it's tracking the individual's moves. That and a little bit of math will help you to put all that together.
Yeah.
And then you see that next level of their technology where they can tap into your DMV records, and they can pull up, like they can integrate all these systems that just give so much information so quickly. They known associates, who you usually drive with, like they're linking license plates together. The future is alarming. And so when we have only 10 in Charlottesville, that's when we really need to set up a structure that protects us.
Especially at this time when the pilot is coming to an end and we have time to rethink whether this technology is for us. In September, the pilot comes to an end. So in October, we can expect City Council to make the decision of whether ALPR stay in Charlottesville or if that, you know what, we tried the pilot, this technology isn't for us. There's too many questions in the air. So I think really now is the time to think about these questions.
Yeah. And we have two comments from Harold and Troy that I think would be good to kind of close out this conversation, because we still got to get to the jail expansion.
I do got one point.
And Max has a point too. But so Harold said that the city, meaning Charlottesville, is Harold Foley. Folks in our local listening area know who I mean by Harold, but he's also a member of Legal Aid Justice and activist in Charlottesville. But the city didn't do much to support the PCOB here, which is Oversight Board in Charlottesville, and that's why there's no real accountability. And then Razor said, where does police power stop and community privacy start? And to me, those kind of bundle together, you know, with what I want to make sure that you all say, you know, before we close the conversation after Max, is that, like, where do we go, right? Because, you know, there's going to be fears, some justified, some unjustified, but from the legal perspective, like where does that power stop? Like what is your ask as a legal professional to say, if you're going to use these cameras, this is what people's civil rights needed to look like?
Yeah, and I love that comment. I think that there's so few times where I'm like, well, the founding fathers, but America is built on the idea of private citizen protections in lots of ways. And it's crazy to hear people not have that same strong-throated protection in this instance, right? Where we've heard so many people talk about privacy before, and with this encroachment on lots of communities in our neighborhoods. And I think that we always need to start with personal privacy in these situations, and then talk about public safety and how those things can react together. And for me, it's such a little fix of the warrant requirement that would make this feel, I think, a lot safer. Now, is that a legitimate protection, or is that just another Band-Aid? Like, we're giving it to the courts. Are they going to make the right call? I think we have to have hope so, but at least that puts a true check on this technology. And
just to, and we've had this, point kind of throughout our conversation, this thread that this technology is so new. What all it's capturing is new. The software is new. We need real time to look at the data before we just start putting up cameras everywhere, and it's too late to rein it back, right? So I think we really have to ask these questions now before we make this a staple in every community, on every streetlight.
Absolutely. And like I said, any police department that's against that must have something they're hiding, in my humble opinion. Right. But what you have, Max?
Two things that I want to mention. First being, and I want to say that I'm in no way saying through this interview that the questions that I'm asking, I am in support of or opposing Flock. It's just me asking questions, my job as a host of the show. But the first thing is one of the conversations that I hear is that do we keep kind of going in circles, chasing our tails as far as what could be, what might happen in terms of Flock if the use of this software locally isn't rendering these type of problematic behaviors, challenges that we're discussing here today, then is it good for us? Is there a reason to keep talking about what to nix it because of what might happen? So that's one conversation that I've at least heard. And the other thing that I think is noteworthy to mention is it's been some months ago, but I know that our local police chief made an announcement at one of the city council meetings as far as cutting off our operations of Flock to other localities. So they cannot access the information that we gather now. But if I remember correctly, we can no longer access theirs either, which, could pose a challenge if there's a crime that we're trying to solve and we could benefit from access to their Flock information. So.
Good stuff. Thank you. Now, I think Razor has something before we go to break real quick. And do y'all mind hanging with us just a few minutes longer so we can get to the jail talk? Okay. Appreciate y'all. Razor.
First thing I want to say, ladies, and Max and Charles, great show. I mean, y'all had us on edge at the pools listening to it. But this is the thing I need people to understand. It was fine for us to have this information when we're looking for bin Laden. It was fine when we go to other parts of the world for us to access these types of things. Americans don't like when it's done to us. So it's pretty much, we've been watching this on movie screens since the beginning of time. But now that it's more locally, we want to have a problem with it. It's just one of those things as we let people come into the country, regardless of how you get here, legally, illegally, whatever, certain technologies that they realize work in other places, they're going to administer when they're trying to find the people, which leads us over to, I guarantee, more prisons and jails are starting to open up and get renovations because they plan on filling them.
That's a great segue. I see what you did right there. I see what he did. So family, is IMHO Talk Show. Tell a friend. Much more great conversation to go, and it looks like Ruby and Maisie will stay with us. Thank you. So we can address fully the jail improvement / expansions that's going on as well regionally. So we are joined by the attorneys of Legal Aid Justice, Ruby Cherion and Maisie Osteen. And hey, we'll be right back right after this break. Stay tuned, and tell a friend.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
IMHO Talk Show. Sir Charles, Miss Max, Razor.
You're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Maxilia Robinson and Charles Lewis. Only on 101.3 Jams.
IMHO Talk Show, back like we never left. Right. Charles.
It's Max.
My bad, Razor.
Man. Be ye ready.
I'm out. I'm out of sync here.
But no, we are joined by and just delighted by all the intellect and the knowledge that we have right here, and the professional expertise from none other than attorneys Ruby Cherion and Maisie Osteen, representing Legal Aid Justice as well. Folks in Charlottesville know about the great work that organization does. And so we've talked about the Flock or ALPR cameras, the license plate readers that's getting a lot of attention, and thank you all for that. Synopsis on that. I feel like you covered all the grounds, from the citizens that you work with to from your professional opinion, and then also the ask of our elected officials, right? And and others, hired officials that have access to this, right? So also another big thing that's in sort of the same realm when we talk about criminal justice, would have you, is the Charlottesville Albemarle Regional Jail. And this is in the expansion thereof. And my understanding is that this is something that a lot of prison systems and regional jails are experiencing, which is the space as well as the accommodations. You have folks who talk about that, okay, we like, this is America. So we treat people humane, even if they are inmates. Right. So then that sort of justifies an argument about jail improvements. But on the other hand, when you talk about jail expansions, a lot of folks want to know, does that mean that is also still connected to the school to prison pipeline? Right. Are we expanding based on quotas? Right. And things of that sort. So where do we start there? In particular, the Charlottesville Albemarle Regional Jail. What can you tell us about that project? And I'd be curious to hear about what else you're seeing around the state in regards to these expansions that are being called improvements.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm happy to talk a little bit about some of the more recent developments that happened with that project, just so everyone is up to date. So starting in about 2019, the conversation started happening at ACRJ because there is a newer section built in 2000, but there's also the older section built in 1974 that has horrendous conditions that I'm sure everyone has heard about. But on June 16, 2025, Charlottesville City Council, in a close vote, 3-2, voted in favor of expanding the jail. And actually, the vote was supposed to be June 2nd, but this was pushed because all of the bids came back from the construction companies over budget. The original budget was $49 million, and the lowest bid that came in was $53 million from English Construction. So actually, at the time City Council voted, the reduced scope was not completed. It was still being ironed out. So City Council was really voting on a promise to bring it back under budget. And we now have the reduced scope that has been posted on the ACRJ website. And we unfortunately see that it's really prioritizing this expansion and new construction over the renovations. That was the original intent of this project, and what was really the hope of community members was to have the renovation part. But we see, for instance, that the building a second floor in the 1974 section has become a priority. We're not replacing the roof in the 2000 section that needs to be replaced. Again, it's really the new construction, the adding of the around 17,000 square feet that has been prioritized in this, and kind of future what the timeline looks like is that the construction is supposed to begin September 15th and take about 28 months to complete. But those are kind of some of the things that have happened in the interim, since I know y'all have talked about this topic before on the show as well.
No, but great to get your perspective, though. That's what we're about, getting all the perspective. But Macy, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and kind of outside of Charlottesville, this is at a time when we're seeing, and in Charlottesville, right, where this is a time when we're seeing numbers drop since post-COVID, when there was massive efforts to try and, maybe not as massive as necessarily we would want to see, but there were big efforts to reduce jail populations and prison populations, and those numbers did really drop, and that was being maintained in most places. So while we're seeing an investment, and Charles, I think your point is really well taken, that we need to be treating people well, and we need to be making sure that there's not bad conditions. People aren't eating moldy food, that there's not mold in their environment, that it's
have AC,
they're not so hot. Yeah, exactly. But that's not really what we're addressing, right? We're addressing this expansion piece and not the conditions piece. That I am right there with you, that's really critical. Having loved ones and people that I know who've been incarcerated at Albemarle Charlottesville Regional Jail, I know that there are challenges and there's really bad parts of it that could be made better. But that doesn't mean that we need to also grow it at the same time. And sorry, Matt.
No, I'm sorry. I was just going to ask if you could expound on what the currently proposed project will include. I think a gym is in there somewhere for the employees.
Yes, we raised that at City Council, and I believe that is no longer being prioritized. But yeah, like a staff rec room was one of the more top priorities. But earlier you said the school to prison pipeline. Well, we're really seeing a mental health crisis to prison pipeline with this project. So with the second floor in the expansion, what they want to do is add 7 mental health beds. I say mental health beds in quotes because we know people can't get well in the cell. It's essentially like a segregation cell. It's just closer to the medical office in ACRJ. So those are sort of the things that they are doing with this that we are concerned about. And again, if someone is undergoing a mental health crisis, we need to have services in the community that can help that person, not incarcerate them. Because also when they're released, what happens, right? They end up having to go back into the system that's not it's not equipped to adequately handle this, and just causes more trauma.
And can you talk about the funding and the funding sources, right? Because another part of this argument is that if we have a budget that we can put towards incarcerating people, why can't some of this money go towards the preemptive measures, right? So what can you tell us about like how this budget, what this budget is founded upon, what contributes to it, so we can see how we can maybe, renegotiate that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So without getting too much in the weeds of funding, kind of general overview. So about a quarter of this, about $11 million, is coming from the state budget. And the rest of it is going to be split between Albemarle, Nelson, and Charlottesville based on their utilizations of the jail. So whichever jurisdiction has more of their folks there, they have to pay the higher portion. But it's a $49 million budget, but this is pre-interest, right? So for 27 years, they're going to have to pay interest on this. We're looking at over $70 million in total. And the money that Charlottesville will be spending each year for those 27 years is about $1 million just for Charlottesville portion, not talking about Nelson or Albemarle. So that $1 million we really could see invested in the community instead. Could go towards, like we said, the mental health resources in the community, re-entry services, programming for youth. I mean, there are just a myriad of other ways to which to spend this money rather than expanding the jail.
Very true. Got something, Reese?
I'll go ahead, Max.
No, well, I've always had the question of how much of that price tag, you said 49 million, correct? Mm-hmm. Will the developers themselves get? What percentage of that will be their payout for the renovations, the service provided? Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because, this is done for profit. This is not something that, they're doing for free. I think that's a great question. I don't actually know the number off the top of my head, but, this is mostly architects. They do make money off of building carceral facilities.
True that.
Ladies, can I ask you a question, please? Yeah. I know that we're talking about some of the money going into the community to help people before they go to jail or when they get out of jail. But when we talk about building the jail and renovating it, it's almost like we're trying to work on the symptom and not the other part of the problem. Like, I never hear anybody talk about sentencing guidelines from the judges. Because if we want to work on the jails, then we work on some of the sentencing. Everybody knows that not everybody gets judged the same way. People get pulled over the same way, but they don't all get the same sentence. So as long as the judges can tell themselves that they are protecting the community by giving people boatloads of time or keeping bodies going in so that there's no empty beds, that's going to be part of the problem as well, in my humble opinion.
Yeah.
I think you said
it. Yeah, I think absolutely, and I think that goes beyond sentencing too, right? And I don't think that people are pulled over the same. Like, every point of intervention, there's work to be done, and that includes who's pulled over. That includes how people show up with their defense attorneys. That includes how prosecutors prosecute, how judges sentence, how judges grant or deny motions, right? How every single step we need to be looking at and investigating. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I think Charlottesville is exploring, and it would be cool to see if there's community support for, or more diversion opportunities. And I think that there's been a lot of openness to that. And so seeing places where people don't even enter the court system for, there's a whole myriad of reasons people end up in jail. And we're looking at trying to get folks that don't need to be there, not there.
Yeah. I heard that there was some strategic processes, like some workshopping from different community groups and activists that was trying to address that point of figuring out, like how do we not need more beds in prisons, right? Like to everybody's point that you've been making. But from your perspective, legally and whatnot, like what have you seen there as far as I guess more of a seriousness of that conversation, like when you have the warden there, like with a mayor, with an activist, and with an attorney, and people are talking about, okay, well, this budget is approved to expand jails, but how about we have, like more of an in-depth conversation, right, about like all of the needs, so we can try to avoid incarcerating more people, right?
Yeah.
How serious have you seen that conversation happen?
Unfortunately, we've been met. So one thing I'll say before talking on that directly is we don't actually have to guess that we know that Black residents in Charlottesville have disproportionate contact. We know that from the DMC study. That study gives us the data to say we know this is happening in Charlottesville. So this is not even like an assumption we have. This is rooted in data we know and have, that this is the reality of what's happening in the nation, but also specifically in Charlottesville. So that's on that. But also to talk about, so when we would bring this up, that, as was stated, this is not addressing the root of these problems. Particularly there's concerns about folks who are quote unquote high utilizers who return to the jail, right? Expansion does not solve any of those issues. Right. We were met with, we can do both, and we can expand the jail and do these other things. But as we know, money is budgets are limited, especially in a time when the federal government is cutting budgets to localities, that we have to be really judicious about how we spend our money. And so that was a really, it's not true that we can do both all and that there's an unlimited budget. And I think, unfortunately, with prioritizing this, we've showed with our budget what we are prioritizing in here. That's the Band-Aid solution and not the underlying problems.
Do we know how many additional beds the jail will be offering with this renovation?
So that is a great question. So the rated capacity, which is about over, I think it's 320-ish around there, is not changing. But the mental health beds that I was talking about, they go under what's called special purpose beds. So there's about 14 of those being added. They do not count as increased bed space because they're considered short-term beds and that you're only there during a crisis. So that doesn't actually get counted as bed space, but there are going to be 14 special purpose utility cells added.
So 14 beds for $43 million. I tell you what, they can stay with me and Max for $39.50, and I promise I'll feed them 3 times a day.
That sounds like a much more elegant solution.
Has the jail committed to hiring, therapists, psychologists, someone to serve these people who are experiencing the mental health crisis and need to occupy one of those beds?
I think they've stated at community forums that is their intention. Whether that's the reality that will be done, remains to be seen. But again, in a parking lot size cell is not where people get well, right? In a cell by themselves, essentially under segregation, it really only increases trauma. So I think even with the professionals, they're going to be limited to just the context of the jail and the reality of being in a jail.
Mm-hmm. So we're still stuck in my crawl though. And don't get me wrong, like I have friends and family who work corrections. So know that this is coming from a good place, but how dare we as a city even consider investing millions for staff recreation when our kids don't have anywhere to go in the evening times and they're out here shooting each other? How dare we?
Yeah.
But hey, Matt, you were about to say something.
The only thing that I can assume, I haven't seen the conditions of the jail firsthand, and admittedly don't know that I want to, but the only thing I can assume in a project like this is that conditions must be much, much worse than any of us have an idea that they are. And thus the need for such a major renovation. So, putting that into context of what our people who the occupants are experiencing on a day-to-day, whether that's the mold or the, just the different apparatuses or whatnot in the jail, it must be a horrific situation.
And we share those concerns, and when it's a loved one there who's telling you about this horrific experience, it's hard not to be moved. And when we raise this concern, so 2 of the housing units in the newer 2000 section, which doesn't have, the same issues as the 1974 section, are empty. So we asked, why aren't folks going to be housed there if the conditions in 1974 are so bad? And we were given, like various answers, something like, well, the security there isn't as great, and you don't want people, in nearby cells who shouldn't be in nearby cells with each other. But however, that's exactly where all these folks are going to go during the construction in the 1974 portion. So if our priority is really making sure people are in safe, healthy conditions, we would have moved them to the 2000 section. And unfortunately, that's not what's happened here.
Ladies, can I ask y'all a question? I mean, y'all may want to answer, you may not want to. When are we going to just realize that people don't care about people? Like the amount of money that we're spending on, and I'm going to say the wrong thing, Charles, but flock, right? The amount of money we're spending on cameras, and the amount of money that we're spending on, let's say the jail altogether is a city block, right? That amount of money could be invested into the community, but it's not wanted to because prison, drugs coming into the system, locking people up is big business. Like, I think before we grow at all, we have to be honest and say, look, all right, we don't care about people. You know what I'm saying? We want to figure out how to manage them. We know the homeless going to always be amongst us. The Bible tells us, yada, yada, yada. But I don't think, and it's not that people like yourself aren't doing great work, but until everybody's just honest, just say, look, once you get in trouble, we don't care nothing about you. Once you come from that side of the track, we really don't care nothing about you. If you make it over here, I'm going to look every 5 minutes to see if you do something wrong so I can send you back over there. If we're honest with each other, like we are with people from other nationalities that come here, then we can grow. I mean, we see it all the time with Hispanic people. People had prejudices. People had bigotry against them. So it made them group together and become a community of themselves, would help them grow. Black people did it themselves back in the 40s and 50s. We got away from it. We thought that other people's ice was colder. And then when we got diluted, then we had no power. But I think it all comes down to realizing that people don't care about people, whether it's economically, socially, or for whatever reason. And then from that point, we can go to the city council and the managers and everybody else and say, okay, we understand that don't nobody care about these people. What can we do now with the money that we have?
Razor, I think there is some truth there with there being an issue with people caring about people. But I think there are also individuals who would argue that the condition, the safety of the city as a whole is in the state that it's in because we don't want to arrest anybody. We don't want to charge anybody with anything. We don't want to send anybody to jail. We want to give everybody a break. We want to give everybody alternative sentences.
That's not it, Max.
We want to do, okay.
That's not it. They don't want to hear people complain about locking people up. If you go to, matter of fact, all right, dry snitching. If you go down across from Washington Park, you know what I'm saying? You'll see
that a legal term?
Yeah, it is. You'll see police officers sitting at the ends of street, like 12th Street, 11th Street, and open air market. People walking around like zombies. And you'll look at the other end and see the police officers sitting right there watching. You know what I'm saying? But as long as nobody is pulling a gun and shooting somebody, then they're not gonna do nothing because they don't want the so-called activists complaining about, oh, you locking up my cousin them on, you know what I'm saying? Because we got people that for real get on social media and complain about things happening, but won't so much as give $1 to somebody to help them outside of if the camera's not on. Yeah. And it ain't that whole thing of, oh, you don't know what I do behind scenes. And man, that's bull. Because the conditions that we in prove that ain't nobody doing nothing. For real.
So I feel what you're saying in both perspectives. Yeah, and I wanted y'all to chime in. And I feel like that's why you're always going to have people like us having these discussions. You're going to have lawyers like them. You're going to have activists for the fact of that we realize that the system is broken because the system was designed not to care about certain people. So, so I think you spot on from that perspective.
And also pointing out, this is a jail, right? Folks are charged, not convicted. So also just pointing out, how early in the system we seem to be throwing away lock and key and leaving people out is a real concern. And instead expanding a lobby and adding a second floor,
Yeah. So again, as we kind of got to come to a close here soon. Same way that we ended the license plate reader camera conversation from the legal perspective, because you're going to have some who says we at least need the budget for the improvements. Others going to be saying put all that money, into community social services. But from the legal perspective, what is the ask right now, of the folks that you are working with, like with the activism that's happening, that's saying this is too much money for us to be expanding jails? Like, what is the median, for us to come to a resolution that's being asked?
I think to focus on the renovation part and not on new construction and addition would really be, at a baseline, the ask, and to instead invest in community services so that folks get the actual help they need, and we're addressing the root causes of issues rather than the Band-Aid solution, as was said earlier. I also, if I could have a second, some upcoming events that I would love to invite folks to. So first is we're doing a Know Your Rights. So if you want to know about your rights, if you're being stopped by police or arrested, we're going to do a Know Your Rights session at One Stop. It's going to be Thursday, September 18th at the Carver Rec Center. And we'll also talk a little bit briefly about interrogations in that training as well. And we're also, People's Coalition is also doing some listening sessions for community input to help determine our next campaign, since we are officially closing our ACRJ campaign. So we'd love to hear from folks if they've been arrested or involved with the criminal legal system, to come share your lived experiences, concerns, and ideas you have around criminal legal issues in Charlottesville. We're going to have an online listening session, which will be Thursday, September 18th. From 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. on Zoom, or you can come in person on Saturday, October 18th, from 12 to 2. Lunch will be provided, and we'll also provide gift cards as compensation for your time. And I know that was a lot of info all at once, so I'll make sure to put that information in the comments on Facebook.
Please do.
Share some flyers as well, but we want to make sure folks know about those events that are coming up.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to do that. Thank you. Thank you for mentioning that.
Yeah. Great conversation. I don't have anything left. We appreciate you. It's been a wealth of information that you've shared. I think all of us have a bit of a better understanding about the two topics that have been discussed here. So thank you. And the Legal Aid Justice Center is a resource to all of the city residents. I'm assuming Albemarle County residents can utilize your services as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Jen, for sharing your platform to talk about a lot of these important issues. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye-bye.